If you haven't heard or noticed by now, Battlefront 2 is having a resurgence at the moment. With the game being free on the Epic Games Store, there's seemingly more players and more interest in the game than ever. And I'm sure EA are noticing. Heck, the EA Help Twitter account was even tweeting out saying an incredible number of players have joined, which actually prevented anyone more from joining. The servers were at capacity.
200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way.
A lot of players. So what are the chances of this meaning Battlefront 2 could be revived? Because this is something so many players want to see. With all the Star Wars news we've received over the past few weeks, let me just recap the news quick. There was the announcement of all the new TV shows and films, the announcement there's new Star Wars games currently in development, the announcement that EA aren't going to be the only publishers making Star Wars games, and the announcement of Ubisoft's new open world Star Wars game releasing sometime in the future.
With 1 million more well on the way.
But it feels like right now, even though there's all of that, the biggest story to come out of all this is about Battlefront 2. The fact so many new players and also old players have jumped back onto the Battlefront with the game being free on the Epic Games Store seems to be keeping lots of Star Wars fans happy right now. Like I talked about in my last video, it feels like we're in a bit of a transition period at the moment, moving into the next gen, and although we've had all these big announcements, the only game we actually know of that's going to be released next is probably the new LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. So Battlefront 2 is doing a great job of keeping everyone happy at the moment, but surely EA are seeing this. Lucasfilm are seeing this. The interest players have in Battlefront 2 at the moment is incredible, and there's obviously a huge market for a game like this. So what are the chances EA are going to look at this and consider reviving Battlefront 2? What are the chances of Battlefront 2 receiving more updates?
1 million more well on the way.
Hey everyone, it's Andrew. It was late April 2020 that Battlefront received its final update with the Battle of Scarif, and in the community update video, Dennis Brandval, the lead Battlefront 2 dev, said that DICE's vision for Battlefront 2 is now complete. Now, Dennis doesn't even work at DICE anymore, so unless he came back, someone else would have to lead future updates and the direction of the game. But like I said, there's a huge audience for a multiplayer action shooter like Battlefront 2. This right here is more of what Star Wars fans want, because so many people have jumped back online to play this. Now, EA and Lucasfilm obviously have their reasons for ending Battlefront 2's support. They understand the popularity of the game and the rebirth it's had after DICE's multiple updates that brought the game back to life. With Clone Wars content, the original trilogy, some of the sequel stuff, when the game launched in November 2017, it was in a bit of a rough place until probably late 2018, where the game saw more and more people jumping back online to try the new content. It took them about a year to get this thing running again, and since then it's kind of continued to grow. They understand the journey the game's had and can see how they were able to turn this thing around, so why end the support? Well, things were starting to slow down a little in early 2020. The Rise of Skywalker and all the content surrounding that had been released, and then there were a few original trilogy content drops, but although the game was still wildly popular, it felt like things were dipping a little. So EA and Lucasfilm decided to end with the Battle of Scarif, but even with the amount of content in Battlefront 2, it feels like there's just so much more that could be done, especially seeing as though this was around the time we had Season 7 of the Clone Wars releasing. There was no content for this put into the game, and with this and The Mandalorian later in the year, it feels like Battlefront 2 wasn't getting the attention that perhaps it deserved. And I'm not sure it ever got the full attention it deserved. When Battlefront 2 was being developed, DICE were also building Battlefield 5 alongside it. So Battlefront 2 and Battlefield 5 are both giant games in their own right and both launched with shaky releases. Couple things wrong. And apparently, as they were both being made, some of the developers who worked at DICE were being switched between the projects depending on which one needed the attention. So sometimes there'd be more people working on Battlefront 2, and other times more people working on Battlefield 5. And as they currently stand, both are very well polished games, and neither of them are being updated anymore because DICE have said they're putting their full efforts into the next Battlefield game, unless they're working on something else behind the scenes, who knows. But right from the start, I feel like Battlefront 2 needed the full support of a studio, all of its resources into the one game. To create the game it is today, with the amount of content there is in the game, a fully dedicated studio should have been working on this right from from the get-go, not a studio divided between two major releases. I mean, I know nothing of video game development logistics and finances and if doing this would even be viable, but I think that could be the way forward for a game like Battlefront 2. Just think if it had had that kind of support from the start, and perhaps if there's going to be a future Battlefront title or a similar title, I just hope that it gets that kind of attention. Let's just quickly take a look at Apex Legends. The game was developed by Respawn Entertainment in LA, but now that the game is hugely successful and popular, EA have actually decided to give Apex its own studio in Vancouver that works on nothing else but Apex. I think Respawn in LA will still be supporting the game in some way, but just remember Respawn also created Jedi Fallen Order and the new Medal of Honor VR game, and I think they're also doing something else. So they're probably trying to space out their teams and get more dedicated people working on each title. I think Respawn's structure is a little different though, because they build different types of games. You know, Jedi Fallen Order and Apex don't really have too much in common, so it's completely different teams that work on each one. But what I'm trying to say is that I think Battlefront 2 deserves this kind of attention. So let's just say DICE weren't building Battlefield 5 at the same time as Battlefront 2. Can you imagine the game Battlefront 2 might have been, and the game it could still be today? If it was given massive resources, we could see new heroes and characters and maps and eras coming to the game every month, or perhaps every season. Now, the problem is that Battlefront 2 is already a huge game. Something like over 100 gigabytes to download, more than 10 different game modes, over 50 maps, which is outrageously ridiculous. The game is already enormous, so I'm not sure if the game would be stable making it any bigger. I know it's possible for devs to accidentally break games just by adding new content because it changes the entire structure of the game and can affect other parts of it. And especially if the game's getting to the bigger end, I'm not sure even the current or last gen consoles, the PS4 and the Xbox One, would even be able to run or support the game. It requires too much RAM to get everything going. Things can go wrong, and the reason games like Fortnite or Apex can have so many content updates is because the base game remains the same. The maps remain largely the same, and it's only things like cosmetics and an occasional new character that's added down the track. But with so much new Star Wars on the way in the next few years with the Disney Plus TV shows and films, Lucasfilm and EA are going to want a Star Wars game with a live service they can support with new content. They want to be adding content to a game as all of this stuff releases, you'd think, right? They're not doing the films anymore. Battlefront 2 had Last Jedi and Solo, and then also the Rise of Skywalker content with Scarif, I guess, as Rogue One as well. So they were supporting the films. Now that the Skywalker saga is over and these massive Star Wars titles aren't coming out anymore, it's time to look to the future. Just think, in the next 2 years, we're getting the Book of Boba Fett. They could have new character appearances and weapons to the show. Boba Fett character, everyone else in the show. Mandalorian Season 3, I'm surprised Battlefront 2 didn't get any Mandalorian content for even Season 1, when both Galaxy of Heroes and Squadrons received content. We've got Andor, the Cassian Andor series, again, another opportunity to add content from the show, and perhaps even some Rogue One characters. The Obi-Wan series, let's give Obi-Wan an older appearance and have a special Tatooine event, maybe even a Darth Vader thing. And also the Ahsoka series, I think this one speaks for itself. And there's even a bunch more. The potential content for a Battlefront 2 style game over the next few years is ridiculous. And with Battlefront 2's revived popularity, why not continue updating the Star Wars game they already built? With the popularity of Battlefront 2 being free, I'm sure this is making EA and Lucasfilm think about releasing a free Star Wars game down the track with a live service supported by microtransactions. It works so well for games like Apex and Fortnite. How about make Battlefront 2 free for all players across all platforms and introduce a new microtransaction system allowing players to buy cosmetics if they so choose? With the amount of trooper skins and hero appearances already added to the game, there's so much more potential down the track to add more clone legions, droid appearances, rebels, the Empire. Let's bring in the Royal Guards and more battalions like half the ones we've seen in The Mandalorian. Let's get mud troopers and more Imperial officers. There's so much potential. And there's also the potential to do a new release on the next-gen consoles. Like I said, we're still in this transition period moving between consoles, and there's really not that many new games available on next-gen. I mean, there's a bunch, but it's still early days. So how about a brand new release? GTA 5 is getting a new release coming on the next-gen sometime later in 2021, and the game is actually going to be free for all returning players on PS5 for the first 3 months, I think, anyway. And that's because the game is massively supported by microtransactions. GTA 5's economy is expensive, costs a lot to kind of get the new stuff in game if you're grinding for it, but that's that's not really an issue because it keeps people playing. The game is so old now, but there's constantly more cosmetics and items to unlock, cars to add to your collection, and unless you want to grind for the content, microtransactions keep the game alive and development running. Battlefront 2 could do similar, more updates, content releasing alongside all the new Disney Plus shows and films, an upgraded re-release for the next gen that's free to download, and a dedicated studio to work on the game. Obviously, everything I've spoken about today is completely hypothetical. Do I think we could actually see Battlefront 2 come back? I think it's unlikely. It feels more like EA and Disney are working together on several new titles. But I really hope that at some point they'll release some type of Battlefront game that delivers a similar experience to what we have here. Like I said, there's a huge demand for it. The player base is thriving, and it's really good to see people understand this isn't the same game as the one released in 2017. It's great seeing the community and the stigma around Battlefront 2 has evolved. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you prefer to see Battlefront 2 support revived or an entirely new Star Wars game released? Or why not both?
¿Por qué no los dos?
You can catch up on some other Star Wars gaming news here, lots has been happening. And follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and join my Discord to hear about news as soon as it happens, Star Wars news, gaming news, my life news, everything else. And thanks for watching this. My name's Andrew, I'll catch you soon.
Stay bombastic.